Right, and good afternoon to those that are chiming in. We're going to get started in just a moment or two. Just going to give everyone an opportunity to join in on the page webinar for SBS Day, and welcome. We're excited to have each and every one of you. We'll give it just a minute or so, and then we'll get started. Again, on behalf of SBS and particularly the within page, we're excited about all of you that are attending our session today. I know it's going to be an exciting opportunity for you to learn about all of the programs and pathways within page. So just give us just a moment and then we'll get started. Okie doke. Well, we don't want to belabor the time, so we're a few minutes into the start time. So again, welcome to each of you. I'm so glad that each of you took the opportunity to attend this particular SBS Day event, which is focused on the Page Pathway Overview webinar. We have some exciting content and some exciting discussions with our panelists, and so we hope that you're going to learn and also interact with us as we have a Q&A session as well. My name is Leah Norris, and I'm the Page Program Director, and I have the privilege to work with so many faculty within Page. Of course, we are directed by our dean, which is Dean Saunders, and then we have our SBS chair, Dr. Pilkington, and both are attending as well. But our panelists today will consist of those that have oversight within Page. We have Dr. Kimmel, who is over political science. Anthropology, we have Professor Ferguson, and for geography, we have Dr. Grabadin, and I oversee the area in economics. And so we're excited to share the information that we have today for Page. Now, if you're looking for some program specifics, of course, you can check out our website. MTC covers a number of different information, such as the full curriculum, as well as the career opportunities that exist for Page, as well as all of the SBS tracks as well. So please give it a look as you are going, preparing for your classes and trying to understand more about the pathways. Now, there are a number of different pathway courses. As you can see, political science has a number of different pathway-specific classes and others that cross over to other electives and other pathways. And so we'll talk more about these as we go through the program, as well as the two tracks that exist in political science. Even in anthropology and geography, we have several classes that are program specific. And of course, today we're going to cover more of that as we're going through. And so we don't want to belabor the point, but we want to get started with our awesome panelists today. And our first question, which I'm going to pose to Dr. Grabadin, who's over geography, what is the essence of your discipline? And what are some common misconceptions about your particular subject matter?
All right, so common misconception that geography is not just about maps and it's not just about locating places. That's certainly a starting point, but the essence of geography really is spatial analysis. And to kind of unpack that a little bit, geographers are interested in the relationships between places and things and processes and networks and systems. And so, to spatially analyze, for example, commodities and start to think about their supply chains and all the different parts of the world that they affect touch one another, or to think about, territorial conflicts, borders, how they get to be where they are, how the formation of state and the unfolding of history kind of gives us borders and territory around the world. And so, the essence, spatial analysis.
Awesome, thank you. Let's continue forward with anthropology. Professor Ferguson, can you please give us some insight on that question as well?
I would love to. Thank you, Leah. Yes, well, anthropology, there's a lot of different misconceptions about it, but the essence of the whole discipline is really to study humanity through all space and time. And that's a rather broad, study, for that discipline. So we actually have 4 large subdisciplines underneath the larger one that kind of encompasses both the biological into the past, into the modern times. I would say some of the misconceptions I get often, I am by training an archaeologist, and I can't tell you how many times I've had people go, oh, you love to dig dinosaurs. I don't do dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are not even within the realm of anthropology. But because of the fact that we do digging like paleontologists, we often get that kind of misconception. We are concerned with humans and human ancestors. So, once we get past that, we're talking about a whole nother discipline.
Awesome. And I think that that's going to lead into some conversation we'll have later today, which really focuses in on, trying to get students to unlearn or get rid of their preconceived notions about the subject matter. So that's definitely an important point there too. Awesome. And let's round it out with Dr. Kimmel, if you will discuss the dynamics with political science.
Sure. So basically, political science is the study of government and its many, many facets, from international levels, across countries, within the United States, within individual countries around the world, at the state level, the local level, and all the many myriad ways that it can interact with citizens and other parts of the world. Misconceptions, I guess one of the biggest ones is that political scientists are sort of breathlessly following current event debates. That is definitely not true. Political scientists, scholars who study it, actually kind of have a strong distaste for regular politics, right? The stuff that you see in the news a lot is not terribly compelling to me and to a lot of political scientists. Another one is, I think, that political science is not history, right? There's certainly historical components, but we are a separate discipline from history. We study it differently. We think about it differently. We research it differently. And then I think something that generally probably isn't fully understood for a lot of people is how many different career fields are open to somebody with a political science degree. There are a lot of paths that one can take with the sort of knowledge and skills that you learn, because political science covers so much, from like policy development in the bureaucracy to the courts to national security, and on from there.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I definitely can identify with that, because in economics, I'm always feel like I have to tell students we're not going to focus in on stocks or, things of that nature. We're going to cover really just understanding how people make optimum choices. And so it is a process of that unlearning, or getting students to think beyond maps with geography or just digging, and looking at dinosaurs, as Professor Ferguson said, with anthropology. So much deeper than that. And even as Dr. Kimmel mentioned, that, this is going to be relevant on the pathways, or even if students are not. So students can gather important information regardless of whatever track that they're on here at the college. So that's great information. All right, so let's look at, what students find the most interesting about the content of your courses. I know we've all had those aha moments where you see the light bulb go on, with students just kind of catching them off guard or realizing there's some connections there. So let's start with anthropology. What kind of topics, really are your students intrigued by?
I would say in all of the courses that I teach, one of the things that, kind of is a reoccurring theme with students is the connections that they make with what we're talking about in class with their daily lives. Anthropology studies humanity, and that's both from a biological, cultural, social perspective. And students are as much a part of culture as anybody else. And so, one of the things I think that's, really encouraging, and I love to see with my students, is when they make those connections, when they connect what it is that we're talking about in class, kind of in this very critical, analysis way, but then they can apply it to their own lives. I feel like it's a really good way to digest the material too. So, what better way to understand a concept than to understand how that concept is actually affecting you and your life?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. What about political science? Can you chime in, Dr. Kimmel, regarding that particular question?
Sure. I think one of the most interesting things for me personally, and I think for a lot of students, is that I like to spend class time focusing on a smaller number of issues and going into more detail about perspectives and issues that a lot of people haven't really been exposed to as much before, especially in a class like government, where you've taken, government classes in high school and in middle school, and some exposure in elementary school. That can be kind of repetitive, and so I like to look at areas that they probably haven't really thought much about before, haven't really been exposed to much about before, and that perspective I think is more compelling, also to me personally.
Absolutely. And as you can see with political science, the everyday news, there's something unfolding that you can highlight in your courses that I'm sure that they can relate to. So that's really great that that students can see themselves and see the relevancy. Last but not least, what about geography? What topics have been intriguing for your students?
Yeah, I think, well, my students love field trips, right? Everybody loves field trips. We do lots of those. But also just thinking about places that they've never thought about before. I mean, when we're studying a part of the world and they don't even know the country names or where they're located, and then as we sort of work through, they start to realize the global connections between that place and us, and really kind of opening up new worlds for them to explore on their own.
Absolutely, that's great. And I definitely can identify with everything that you all mentioned, because I know definitely with economics, I feel like the biggest takeaways are when I connect it with other disciplines like psychology, or even geography. I have a couple of lectures that I connect with that area. And even too, just when they really see the true meaning of some of the topics that are misused in other mediums. And so it's very important for us, to show them those connecting dots. Okay. And again, those that are attending live, make sure that you put questions in the Q&A box as we're going through, because we're going to be able to answer those later on in the session. So if you have something particularly about a particular pathway that you want to learn about, or a particular discipline or subject matter, we'd love to hear your questions, and we'll get to those as soon as possible. Okay. So in our area of expertise, there are definitely some direct career paths that students can think of as they are preparing for their future. But what are some, so you can mention those, the common career paths, but also too, what are some uncommon career paths that people can pursue as they're researching your subject matter? Let's start with political science. Dr. Kimmel, can you chime in on that?
A lot of people who are in political science are interested in going on to law school or some legal related work. Also, political campaigns is attractive to some people, bureaucracy, working for one of the many, many different agencies. Yeah, when I was in grad school, I had a friend, my office mate, who went to go work for the CIA as an analyst, right? And so there are a lot of different government paths that are open to people in political science. I think some of the less well-known ones are that it can also be good training for a nonprofit job, right? I mean, well, I guess any government job is technically nonprofit, but I'm thinking of like a charitable organization. Like something like Harvest Hope, which is a food bank, right? The bulk of their budget comes from the federal and state governments. And so you need to know how those governments work. You need to understand the relationships between them. In one of my classes, I've had a lobbyist come in from Harvest Hope and talk about their work and how she went into a South Carolina congressman's office and said, well, Harvest Hope does all these things across the state. And the congressman said, what about my district? And she had nothing for him. And so she had to, go back and crunch those numbers, right? And if you come into it already understanding those things, you can walk into the office on the first encounter and make a really good first impression. And, some of those nonprofit, the lobbying and the executive director positions pay really well. They can be really fulfilling work. And so those are also a lot of paths that are not what people maybe think of right off the bat.
Absolutely, and that would never come to my mind as well. So, of course, it's going to support whatever initiatives that individual has for their career path. So that's awesome. Let's hear from the geo track and then anthropology with the same question.
So I guess the more common career path would be related to maps, map making, and sort of analyzing spatial data. So everything from redistricting, in sort of connecting with political science to designing and managing supply chains, right, a connection with economics, to, mapping out potential sites for archaeological digs, right? So kind of, providing that kind of information for different folks. I guess the more perhaps unusual would be lots of different jobs in interpretation, and I don't mean language interpretation, but tour guides, historical preservation, park rangers, right? All these aspects where you've got to be able to kind of show people what they're seeing in their environment and what it means, and sort of provide that educational component in all those different fields.
That's interesting. Thanks, Brian. Professor Ferguson.
All right. Well, like I said, we've got 4 different subdisciplines in anthropology. We've got 2 that kind of center on like a more science-based kind of methodology and underpinning, and the other one is very social, like in its underpinning. So in terms of the common ones, we've got several common ones within anthropology. As I mentioned to you guys before, but I'm an archaeologist by training. Archaeology is one of the larger subdisciplines within anthropology. We also have, evolutionary anthropologists who study human evolution, research in that kind of direction. That's, under the bioant. We've got linguists. We do talk about interpreters, right? Which aren't necessarily all of what linguists do, but we are actually the language interpreters is often something that we will see. And then, just anthropology, cultural anthropology has such a wide array of applications that someone who's majored in that could eventually go. And many of the even more common occupations don't have anthropologist in the title because of its broad nature and of application. Anthropology, someone with an anthropology major could, essentially walk into a lot of different places and probably apply because of the skills that they've picked up. One of the more uncommon ones that a lot of people don't think about is like anthropology's role in like the business world and also the medical field. Especially with COVID and living in a pandemic, our branch of medical anthropology has exploded over the last couple of years. It was already starting to get big, but increasingly as we were starting to address deficiencies within our healthcare system, anthropologists and medical anthropologists are really important in kind of helping to identify where those deficiencies are to help make those systems better, right? And we always kind of say start local. So we're not talking like big overarching systems, but like how are hospitals operating? How are they working with their patients? What's their patient relationship? That dynamic. An anthropologist a medical anthropologist could really help with that. Also market research in the business world. Pretty much most market researchers probably have some background in anthropology. It's the study of humanity, and marketers are trying to sell you stuff. So the study of understanding how humans are is it's not a big leap to go over into the business world. And then international business. If you're looking at international business, which is pretty much getting to be business in general, the diversity skills and learning how to work with people is something that anthropology offers, and in a lot of the international business degrees these days actually has anthropology as one of those required courses because of what it offers to that particular that career.
That's amazing. And just to hear, we do see some overlap when we begin to look at some of the page curriculums and there are also some classes that maybe are on the geo pathway that are also on the anthropology pathway. And, so we can see that they support each other in the efforts, but also too, there are just a wide array of different opportunities that exist for students who may not have thought about anthropology, political science, or geography initially. So hopefully those that are watching this are really beginning to think, outside the box and realizing the value that they are receiving with the courses that are within PAGE. That's excellent. And so, of course, we try to keep our classes as interactive and try to relate to our students as we're going throughout the semester. But I wanted you all to chime in on what are some of the hot topics in your area of expertise that are relevant to non-majors or the general public. And so you can expound on a couple of them if you so desire. Let's start out with geo, and then we'll get anthropology pathway to chime in next.
All right, hot topics. Climate change is certainly a hot topic in all the senses of the word. And that's certainly something that geographers have been involved in a variety of different ways, from the physical science side, sort of tracing those networks and systems and seeing how they interact, as well as the human component of not only the cause but also the problems, climate, refugees, reorganizing food systems, those kinds of things. Another one that I mentioned a couple of times is sort of supply chains, and I think that's an interesting one to think about right now, because a lot of times what we do in the class is sort of pick a commodity and then sort of trace it back to all the places it touches, which is usually a pretty hidden system. But with COVID, it's very visible, right? We're thinking very much about why that thing isn't on the shelf, and thinking about work stoppages in different parts of the world, or the shipping system getting kind of backlogged. And so that's something that I think is being more revealed by current events, but something that we normally kind of uncover or sort of peel back. I also, we've been talking about and thinking in my class a lot about situation with Ukraine right now, and sort of the history of those borders and those power dynamics. And I'm sure this is something that TJ's international science students are thinking of, or international relations students are thinking about too. When things flare up, right? Can we really understand what's happening? Yeah.
So hot topics, I have lots of them, because again, we're such a broad discipline here in anthropology. Right now, with us living in a pandemic, I've said this to many of you guys, and I've said it to many of my students before. It's like anthropologists have been talking about pandemics like for a long time, and we've done a lot of study on it. And we've talked about them in our classes. We've written papers on it. We've done lots of studies. And so it was always a question. And I remember when the pandemic started, it was like, oh, it's starting now, because we knew it was going to come. It was something that we had expected for a very long time. It wasn't an if it happens, it was a when. And so, since the pandemic has started, and many of my other colleagues who teach anthropology have also kind of jumped on this, because, part of being an anthropologist is to be flexible and what happens to culture when it changes. But the pandemic has really become very central to what I talk about in class, because there's so many things about the pandemic that are relevant to what we talk about in my courses. Cultural anthropology, we can talk about the response that we've had, the social responses that we've had, and the different types of social responses to the pandemic, which we've all had a really pretty much front row seat to, right? We can also, in my 203 class, that's my physical anthropology and archaeology course, we actually take COVID and almost use it as like a teaching tool to show how viruses impact human populations, and to demonstrate that, it's happening to us right now. We're in the thick of it. But this has happened to us before in a different form. We've studied it before. We've got some information, and we can in some ways predict what might happen, or give you some options, or give some ideas of what the different ways of reaction to them. But still, in the end, right, we're all living through it just at the same time, so it kind of keeps coming back. So the pandemic's been something that I've talked about a lot in all of my courses for the last 2 years, and has yielded some really interesting conversations within the class.
And that's amazing to see how, you were already, it was already on your radar even before. And so, probably there wasn't that connection prior to them taking your class to realize that this is relevant even with what we're currently experiencing now. And so definitely can identify with all three of you that mentioned your hot topics, because in economics, GDP is always a hot topic, or debt and deficit. Even in my micro class where we talk about monopolies, those are fascinating topics that, you know, get into some heated debates about pricing strategy and availability for consumers. So we definitely have topics within PAGE that are relevant despite what career path you're on, and that can really help you see the world around you in a different manner. And so I hope that all the students that are currently taking PAGE courses or that will take them can see that this is a core essence of how we function. And again, those that are watching live, we still have some opportunities for some Q&A. And so make sure if you have questions that you leave those in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them when we get to the end of our questions that we have prepared. And so we're hoping that you can get more insight on the PAGE pathway. So make sure you chime in there so we can answer those questions. Okay. Moving on to the next question, and we'll start with anthropology. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask Dr. Kimmel on the last question. My apologies. Dr. Kimmel, can you answer that last question dealing with looking at the current hot topics? My apologies for skipping over you.
It's okay. I think one of the biggest ones a little bit closer to home is Stephen Breyer has stepped down from the Supreme Court, and Joe Biden is looking at who he's going to nominate to replace Stephen Breyer. And one of the candidates that whenever a president is appointing a Supreme Court justice, there are usually like hundreds of people who think they have an insight into what's going on in the White House. Most of them are usually wrong. But there has been a lot of push, at least from the outside, for Judge Childs. She is a South Carolina judge. She has a law degree and I think a business degree too. She has a pretty different background than a lot of the current Supreme Court justices, and she's a South Carolinian, and her advanced degrees aren't from some of the, most Ivy League institutions, which is most of the people on the Supreme Court today. So she would bring a different background. In addition to her racial background, she's a Black woman. There's never been a Black woman on the court. So, that's something that's going to be in the news a lot over the next few weeks as Biden makes his deliberations on it. Biden used to be a senator, and senators like to deliberate and think and talk, and he still does that as president. And so it'll be probably a few weeks before we know who the candidate is, and that'll be an ongoing story. So it's impossible to know for sure, but it does look like she has a pretty good chance, and she's definitely going to be considered, it appears. That's about all we can really say with certainty for now.
Mm-hmm. And I think
can I ask a discipline question of Helena, because I got really interested while you were talking about the pandemic. Totally off topic. Leah, if you don't want me to do this, I don't have to.
No, go ahead.
Helena, how do pandemics end?
Very slowly. They have to turn into an endemic, which, we're not really close to that, but it will eventually get to that point, where it will become more controlled in on like regional, if that makes sense, and which we're already starting to see that a little bit. So the thing is like the pandemic doesn't necessarily end everywhere at the same time, right? So like, a pandemic can go endemic in a certain place if they've learned how to control it within their borders. But of course, COVID's been problematic because of that.
And I think I think she highlighted something really key there, which we're seeing the interconnectedness and how that can create challenges, whereas in other areas it creates opportunities when we see how we're interconnected, and we see those common themes in all of our subject matters. And I was kind of thinking a similar question to Dr. Kimmel related to that. So definitely glad that she provided some more insight on that one. Let's move along, and we have a question regarding some specifics within your disciplines. What are some important dynamics that are changing in your field of interest? I think a lot of students are not really aware, that, as more theories come into play, or as different aspects are changing in our field, that, you know, there are some things that we're going outside of the textbook to bring new light on that. So I will start with, let's start with geo on this one, and then we'll go to anthropology.
Yeah, so dynamics change. I think one big thing is user generated data. So, you know, if we're trying to think globally and understand global systems, and we have so many data points from around the globe, we can start to understand these systems better. And so there's a big movement in citizen science. So, you know, instructing people how to count birds in their backyards and report different species migrations, and report rainfall. There's an app that NASA has now called the Globe Observer that my students are using. Essentially, you just point your cell phone at the sky and line it up with one of the satellite flyovers, and that gives NASA an image from below while they're constantly taking images from above. And so the sort of power of having that data kind of in people's hands and contributing to our global understanding. Yeah, I think the other thing is environmental change, and that's something that I'm constantly sort of following in the classes. So, you know, as we talk about ice or glaciers or sea ice or whatever, you know, constantly kind of monitoring that data. So we'll do things in class where like pull up like live video feeds or something to kind of see things in action, or look at a time lapse over the course of months that normally we would chart over the course of years. So environmental change is definitely another one of those for sure. Elena?
Thank you, Brian. A lot of the same things. Brian and I have a lot of similar, you know, kind of fields of like, you know, analysis when it comes to that. But, you know, just like he was talking about with the climatic stuff, you know, think about the social impact of that. You know, when it comes to environmental issues and things that are happening because of climate change, whether or not we're talking about rising sea levels or we're talking about stronger storms and everything like that, we have about 50% of humans on the planet that live within 80 miles of ocean. And so like when we have these things happening, there's going to be a social impact to it. So there's a large degree, and this has been going on for quite some time, but there's a large degree of emphasis in trying to understand how that like climatic shifts are going to be impacting populations. And, you know, just kind of like, you know, what we were talking about with the pandemic, the same thing is true, right? Even with the pandemic, when you have something that's on a global scale that spreads across these globalized networks that, you know, we're talking about with that interconnectedness, you know, the effects of that is not really something we can predict what we think is going to happen, but we don't actually know exactly what's going to happen until sometimes when it's happening, right? And so, you know, one of the things that anthropology has always really been good at is being able to kind of study culture on the edge of change, right? As it is doing that change and trying to say, okay, this is what's happening now. You know, now we've got some insight to kind of maybe give us an understanding of what's happened before it or what might happen, you know, in the future. But again, it's like, you know, we just kind of have to be right there at that edge of that change. And really, I'd say the biggest one for anthropology in terms of dynamics of change has been that it's increasingly been focused on the entire globalized world. Anthropology traditionally was started with studying the non-West, right? And today, because you really cannot find many systems that aren't integrated to some degree into our globalized system, you know, we now can't just cut ourselves off at the non-West, because there's you know, there's a flow of all kinds of things that go in between the West and the non-West.
Awesome. And let's round up the question. Dr. Kimmel, will you chime in regarding the changing dynamics in political science?
I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because, you know, the social scientists all kind of do this the same way. You know, it's, you know, new data, new methods, new problems. And so as, you know, that's one of the biggest differences between political science and history, right? History is more of a humanity discipline, whereas political science is a social science. We're more interested in questions like causality, right? What causes factors? What causes global warming? Is it government decisions that cause it? Is it your gloriously beautiful and powerful Cadillac Escalade that is polluting the environment terribly, unfortunately? it's those kinds of factors. I was at a conference at the start of the semester and went to a panel discussion looking at pardons, right? So if you are convicted of a crime, depending on whether it's the state level or the federal level, different institutions, different players will have the power to pardon your criminal offense, and you can be forgiven for what you have done, let out of jail early, all your rights returned to you. And then there are variations on that theme. Different states do it differently. And there was a woman who was collecting data on those, and she mentioned it was like 10 states had no record keeping process for pardons in their state, that they could just send her a document. So she was having to collect all that data. That's a lot of what scholars do, right? They go around and they see what is missing and they start collecting the data and putting it together and, trying to understand what it all means, within the context of new events.
And I'm hearing a constant theme as we're going through all of the different pathway disciplines, and we're seeing the importance of technology and the advancement of that, and being able to now share with our students more data to show why these trends exist, or to explain some of the phenomenons that have taken years or even decades to research before. And so that's some of the cutting edge that we see and the benefits that students have taking these courses now that they probably didn't have before. I know I've had the opportunity to attend all of their classes just to see some of the research that's being explaining some of the patterns that exist in their disciplines. And it's really fascinating to really see some of those items displayed as well. Okay, and again, want to remind those that are attending live, if you have any questions, final call for some Q&A. So just make sure that you're putting those in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we'll get to those in a moment. But we're always planning different events. I know that all of us within Page work closely together as we're planning events now and what we're going to plan for the future. In the past, we've held an event about food insecurity. So we did that last year, I believe, or the year before. But there's some other things that are on tap coming up. So definitely want to give those that are here within the disciplines an opportunity to talk about any planned programming or things that are on their radar that they are thinking about offering for students to attend. Let's start with anthropology. Anything upcoming that we can keep our eyes open for?
Well, I like to do things collaboratively, and Brian and I are both doing a social science panel discussion. What's the date on that, Brian? Do you remember? It's the 20.
It is on February 24th.
So it's on February 24th, and it's at, help me out, Brian. What time is it at?
That's a good question. Let me look at my calendar. You tell
So
him
while
what
he's
it's
doing
about,
that,
and I'll get the details.
yeah, we're going to be talking about plastics in our environment. And so we're going to be joined by our sociology professor, Christine Witowski, and she is going to be we're all going to be talking about some kind of this discipline specific approaches to some of the environmental challenges that plastic is really posing for us right now, because a lot of people don't understand this, but plastic, although it is very, very useful, it does not get recycled as much as we think that it does, and it's posing a lot of problems, and we're just living in a really, really disposable world. So we've got that. And yeah, 24th at 2:30, we will be doing that. We'll definitely have some information out there. And then Brian and I'm gonna let Brian talk about, some of the other things that we had talked about having planned for this semester.
So we're also promoting our study abroad trip. We're going to Barcelona in May 2023. We're having multiple information sessions about that. And that's also something that Helena and I are collaborating on, along with a psychology faculty member, Holly Beard. And I think this has come up again and again, but the overlap between our disciplines, right? And I don't know that any of us are particularly interested in kind of policing the boundaries between them, right? The conversations that I have with you all that kind of cross over or offer different perspectives on these themes are actually absolutely critical. And so that plastics and environment thing, getting those three different perspectives, as we're traveling through in Barcelona and visiting these sites, to see what does the anthropologist have to say about sort of the cultural aspects of what we're seeing, right? What does the psychologist have to say about society and sort of how society is organized and how we behave in different contexts. And so that study abroad is for May 2023. I'll put the date and time for our next interest meeting in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Kimmel, anything in the works either now in this term or something that they can look forward to that you host on a regular basis?
Sure, looking forward to the future. Political Science has started doing a Constitution Day event, which actually started back in the mid-2000s in sort of a national push. And these things kind of come up every few decades where there'll be another resurgent push to emphasize education on American history, the Revolution, the Constitution, the Declaration, things like that. Sort of a recurring theme. You can sort of trace it back over time. And this one somewhat mandated colleges to have a Constitution Day event. And so MTC has had them for years. And this past year, we had our first one with political science scholars, 2 faculty who work here part-time at the college. And so we'll be doing one of those in the fall. And, just looking for potential career opportunities for political science panelists to come in and talk with political science pathway students about what they might be interested in doing and what their work is like, and the flexibility around, I think, all of our disciplines as far as what kind of careers you want to go down.
Awesome. And just to put in my plug for econ, which I always try to collaborate as well, I'm going to work with an individual in sociology, where we're going to look at social media and see how it connects with economics as well as sociology. And so that's going to happen in April, to be determined as far as that particular date and time, but it'll be posted on the website and promoted through the SBS courses as well. So we hope that you all will chime in and to any of our events within PAGE that we have upcoming. I don't have any questions, but are there any final comments from any of the panelists that you want to close us out in regarding your pathways or discipline specific content, or even from our leadership team, Dean Saunders or Dr. Pilkington? Anyone else that wants to chime in before we close out?
Leah, I just wanted to ask, for the event that you're doing in April, are you going to be talking about things like meme stocks?
No, not necessarily. When I was working with Avetta within that Professor Hayward Robinson Hayward, we were discussing just how there's a disillusionment with social media, and we were going to kind of pull that, especially during the pandemic, where that's been so crucial, and especially with a push for regulating the usage or time usage that people have, where it's becoming heavily regulated, and just trying to get students to understand how it relates to our subject matter. So we went into several different dynamics where we were trying to figure out which angle we were going to approach that topic, because it may be something that we're going to look at being a series as opposed to just a one-time event. So I'm really, really excited to work with one of my colleagues within SBS on that. Thanks.
I just want to jump in and just thank you all for adding your unique perspectives, and just let everybody know that the faculty you've been hearing from today are extraordinary faculty. They know their fields, they love their fields, and more importantly, they have a passion for teaching and for helping students, create pathways in their lives that bring success and fulfillment and meaning. And truthfully, each of these pathways, the anthropology, the geography, our American government and international relations pathways, are transformative pathways. They can open new possibilities for career, professional development, and help you see yourself in the world in totally new ways. So I'm very privileged to work with these colleagues, and want you to know that whatever pathway you choose, if it's in the field of social and behavioral sciences, you're going to have an extraordinary experience with these great faculty. So thanks to them for their time and their insights and for all that they do.
Thank you, Dr. Pilkington. Okay, seems that there are no other comments. we're going to close out, and we're getting a number of thank yous. So I definitely want to thank all of our panelists for their time and their preparation for this. And again, we wanted to make sure that those in SBS, as well as those that take courses within the SBS pathways, that they understand the richness of what's within each discipline. So I hope that this brought shed a new light as to what was occurring when we begin to look at all of the different disciplines within this. So thank you all for your time, panelists. Thank you to the attendees, and we hope that you learned something from this session. Again, check out our MTC website. Feel free to reach out to us so that we can assist you with any other further questions you may have. Have a great one and enjoy the rest of the SBS day.
Great job, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much.